Deep inside the Nazi death camps, while gas chambers belched smoke and guards whipped lines of skeletal prisoners, something far more sinister unfolded. Not just killing, but science. Doctors in white coats turned concentration camps into human laboratories. Twins sewn together, women sterilized with acid, men frozen alive in ice tanks. This is the story of the Third Reich's doctors of death, the physicians who turned healing into horror, all in the name of racial purity. 4 chapters, 4 monsters, one chilling truth: the men who should have saved lives became the architects of unimaginable cruelty. Chapter 1, The Angel of Death, Josef Mengele in Auschwitz. Imagine this: a cattle car door slams open at Auschwitz-Birkenau. 2,000 terrified people stumble into freezing night air. An SS officer steps forward, young, handsome, impeccably dressed in a tailored uniform. He smiles. With one gloved hand, he casually sorts life from death. Left to work, right to gas chambers. This is Dr. Josef Mengele, 32 years old, and his real work is just beginning. From academic to butcher, Mengele wasn't some back-alley thug. Double PhD in medicine and anthropology. Pre-war researcher at Germany's top genetics institute. Arrives at Auschwitz, May 1943. To him, it's not a death factory. It's a laboratory with endless test subjects. Prisoners called him Angel of Death. Why? He whistled Wagner while sending 1,500 people daily to crematoria. Brought kids candy one day, dissected them the next. The twin obsession. New transport arrives. Mengele charges down the ramp screaming, "Zwillinge! Twins!" Parents hesitate. They know claiming twins saves the kids from immediate death. 1,500 twin sets collected, ages 5 to 12. Special barracks, extra food, candy, clean clothes. Kids think they've escaped hell. They haven't. The horror begins. Day 1. Measure everything. 150 body dimensions per child. Plaster teeth molds. Fingerprint every toe. Day 2. Blood draws until kids collapse. Unknown chemicals injected to see what happens. Day 3. Mengele's favorite, eye color experiments. Chemical dyes injected directly into eyeballs. Result? Agony, blindness, no anesthetic. One survivor, 10-year-old Eva Kor. They injected my twin sister Miriam with bacteria. Her neck swelled. They cut it open without painkillers. She survived. 14 other sets didn't. Mengele tried sewing twins together. Blood transfusions between incompatible types. Spinal taps, skull pins, castrations, sex change attempts. The chocolate uncle. Most chilling? His act. Mengele played kind uncle, gave chocolate, whispered, "You're safe," then injected phenol straight into hearts. Moshe Offer, 12. Mengele gave me and brother TB toys. One day he took TB for tests, returned with pins in skull, died in my arms. Final step, kill both twins simultaneously. Compare organs, shipheads, eyes, genitals to Berlin labs. Science. The scorecard twins collected. 1,500 sets. Survived. 200 kids. Total Mengele's papers. Preserved. Published post-war under false name. When Soviets liberated Auschwitz. January 1945, Mengele vanished. His research continued in Argentina. Died 1979. Never punished. But Mengele was just first. Next, doctors who turned women into lab rats. Chapter 2. Karl Klauberg. Sterilizing an entire people. Picture a different kind of selection. Not on the ramp, not between life and gas chamber, but between who is allowed to have children and who is condemned to permanent barrenness. In Block 10 of Auschwitz, and later in Ravensbrück, Dr. Karl Klauberg turned women's bodies into a testing ground for one of the regime's most chilling goals: mass industrial sterilization of those the Nazis called undesirable. Klauberg was not a madman in a basement lab. He was a respected gynecologist, a fertility specialist who once helped women become mothers. Under Himmler's patronage, that expertise was inverted into its opposite. The man who had built a reputation on creating life became obsessed with finding a cheap, fast, scalable way to extinguish the ability to create it. In his experimental blocks, women were lined up for gynecological examinations that sounded almost routine on paper but felt like torture in practice. Without anesthesia, Klauberg rammed instruments deep into the cervix to inject caustic chemicals directly into the fallopian tubes. The pain was immediate, burning, and unbearable. Many collapsed on the examination table. Some never got up. The method was brutally simple: cause massive inflammation and scarring in the reproductive organs so they would be permanently blocked. No surgery, no operating rooms, no expensive equipment, just a syringe, a corrosive solution, and total power over helpless prisoners. If the method worked as he imagined, entire populations could be sterilized at minimal cost. Complications were not side effects to Klauberg. They were data points. Women developed high fevers, sepsis, internal bleeding. Their bellies swelled from infections. They screamed through the nights and died slowly on filthy straw mattresses. Those who survived the first procedures were called back again and again for follow-up, their bodies pushed closer each time to the edge of irreversible damage. Klauberg liked to boast to visiting officials that he could sterilize thousands of women in a single day if given enough staff and supplies. He wrote reports confidently, proposing that his technique could be deployed on entire nations. Poles, Jews, Roma, anyone the Reich decided should disappear, not by killing, but by simply stopping birth. For the women who lived through it, survival came with a different kind of sentence. Many were left permanently infertile, in constant pain, unable to have children long after the war was over. Their bodies carried the scars of an experiment whose purpose was not to cure, but to erase the future of an entire group. And Klauberg, after the war, he spent years in Soviet custody, then returned to Germany and briefly resumed medical practice, even boasting publicly about his work in Auschwitz. He died of a heart attack before facing a full trial. Justice, in his case, arrived late and incomplete. Chapter 3. Sigmund Rascher, Killing in the Name of Survival. While Klauberg targeted the womb, another doctor turned the entire human body into a battlefield between life and death. Dr. Sigmund Rascher was not interested in genes or reproduction. His obsession was survival, specifically how much agony a human being could endure in extreme cold and thin air before dying. The setting this time was Dachau. In the middle of the camp, Rascher's team installed two sinister structures, a high-altitude chamber and tanks of ice water. On paper, their mission sounded scientific: to protect German pilots from freezing seas and low oxygen at high altitude. In practice, it was nothing but methodical torture dressed up as military research. In the ice tank experiments, prisoners were stripped naked and thrown into huge tubs filled with water just above freezing. Guards held them down or chained them so they could not climb out. The goal was simple and horrifying: measure, minute by minute, how the human body shuts down in deadly cold. Observers took notes as bodies shook uncontrollably, teeth chattered, and speech degenerated into incoherent mumbling. Eventually, shivering stopped, not because the subjects were better, but because their bodies were giving up. Skin turned blue, pulses faded, pupils froze in a glassy stare. Sometimes the experiment ended with death. Sometimes Rasher pulled them out moments before, only to try new, re-warming methods, scalding baths, hot air, or forcing naked women to lie on top of dying men in grotesque attempts to transfer body heat. The altitude experiments were no less brutal. Using a pressure chamber, Rasher simulated the conditions pilots might encounter when their planes were hit and depressurized at great heights. Prisoners were locked inside as pressure was rapidly reduced. They clawed at their throats, gasping for air as invisible hands squeezed their chests. Some convulsed so violently their muscles tore. Others bit their tongues until they bled. Witnesses later described seeing men writhe in agony, their lungs effectively exploding, their ears and noses bleeding as their bodies were pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. Once the experiment ended, the victims were dissected, organs removed and examined to see exactly what altitude had done to them. Rasher loved to present his data as vital to the war effort. Graphs, tables, precise times of death, all carefully prepared for Himmler and Luftwaffe officers. But the cold numbers hid the reality. Each line on a chart represented a human being deliberately pushed to a cruel, meticulously documented death. Even within the SS, Rasher's cruelty and corruption eventually became too much. He falsified reports, lied about his personal life, and fell out of favor. Shortly before the end of the war, he was executed by the Nazis themselves, shot in the very system he had served so loyally. The irony is bitter. The man who killed in the name of saving German pilots ended up killed by his own side. The prisoners who died in his experiments never had that twisted symmetry. Their names rarely appear in the footnotes of history. Only their suffering remains. Chapter 4. Judgment and Those Who Escaped It. If the concentration camps were a vast laboratory of cruelty, the post-war trials were supposed to be the laboratory of justice. In 1946-47, one of the most important trials in Nuremberg put 23 Nazi physicians and medical staff in the dock. For the first time, the world heard in chilling detail how doctors had turned their oath to heal into a license to mutilate and kill. Survivors took the stand and described being used as living test material. They named names. They spoke about twins in Auschwitz, women in Block 10, men frozen in Dachau tanks, prisoners infected with diseases on purpose, and bodies dissected while still warm. The courtroom was filled with diagrams, photographs, and medical records that stripped away any last defense of "I didn't know" or "I was just following orders." The judges answered with a clear message. Medicine without ethics is a weapon, and those who wield it will be held accountable. Several doctors were sentenced to death and hanged. Others received long prison terms. Out of this trial came the Nuremberg Code, a set of principles insisting on voluntary consent, the right to withdraw, and the absolute ban on experiments that unnecessarily risk death or crippling injury. It became the foundation of modern medical ethics. But the story did not end there, and it did not end neatly. Some notorious figures slipped through the cracks. Josef Mengele escaped first to Austria, then Italy, and finally to South America under false names. While survivors spent decades living with the nightmares, he worked as a doctor in Argentina, then hid in Paraguay and Brazil. He died on a beach in 1979. Reportedly from a stroke while swimming. never once facing a courtroom, never once hearing a sentence read out against him. Other doctors managed to reinvent themselves in post-war societies that were eager to move on. A few returned quietly to medical practice. Some found positions in research institutions or pharmaceutical companies. Their pasts were buried in bureaucratic files, forgotten or ignored, until, in some cases, journalists and historians dug them up decades later. There is another uncomfortable truth. Some of the data gathered in Nazi experiments, especially in areas like hypothermia and aviation medicine, was later reviewed by Allied scientists. Many rejected it as tainted and unreliable. Some quietly filed it away. The ethical dilemma was stark. If knowledge was gained through horror, can it ever be used? Or does using it mean giving those experiments a twisted form of validation? For the survivors, the answer was simple. No chart, no measurement, no discovery was worth the price paid in screams and blood. Their demand was not for scientific recognition, but remembrance and warning. This must never happen again. And yet, that is why these stories still matter, not just as shocking tales of brutality, but as a mirror held up to any system that allows ideology, ambition, or blind obedience to override basic human dignity. The doctors of the Third Reich were not monsters from another planet. They were trained professionals who chose, step by step, to abandon conscience. The real horror is not only what they did, but how easily they justified it, and how many of them walked away without ever hearing the word guilty pronounced against their name. 23 Nazi doctors faced justice at Nuremberg, 7 hanged, 16 imprisoned, but Josef Mengele died free on a Brazilian beach. Karl Klauberg back to private practice. The Nuremberg Code was born from their crimes, the foundation of modern medical ethics. Yet the question remains, how do educated men become monsters? How does a doctor's oath twist into a license for torture? And most haunting, could it happen again?